Imagine stepping into a church. The candles flicker, the stained glass glows, and the air feels heavy with faith. People gather, believing they are safe in the house of God. Among them is a priest, a man who wears the collar, who smiles kindly, who offers blessings. But what if behind that smile hides a monster? This is the story of Lawrence Hecker, a Catholic priest from New Orleans, who carried his sins in silence for decades. A man who preached purity but lived in darkness. Protected by the church, shielded by silence, he left behind broken lives and wounded souls. For years, whispers of abuse were buried under robes and rituals. Only later, when the truth could no longer be hidden, did his victims find the courage to speak. What followed was one of the most shocking cases of betrayal, cover-up, and delayed justice in American Catholic history. This is not just the story of one man. It's the story of a system that let him thrive. Stay with us as we uncover the rise, the crimes, the cover-ups, and the final downfall of Lawrence Hecker. Chapter 1. The Beginning of a Priest. Lawrence Hecker was born in 1931 in New Orleans, Louisiana. He grew up in a world where the church wasn't just a place of prayer, it was the center of community life. Families looked to priests as leaders, as voices of wisdom, as holy men who could do no wrong. From a young age, Hecker was drawn to the priesthood. In 1958, at just 27 years old, he was ordained as a Catholic priest. His new life seemed noble, filled with promises of faith and service. Parishioners saw him as a man chosen by God, someone who would guide the young and comfort the old. But behind the cassock and collar, Hecker carried something far darker. His charm and gentle voice made him trusted. Parents left their children with him, believing they were in the safest hands possible. But those safe hands would soon become the very tools of betrayal. Throughout the 1960s, Hecker served in schools and parishes across New Orleans. He coached boys, took them swimming, invited them to the rectory. To outsiders, it looked like a caring priest who was active in his community. To the boys, it became something else, something terrifying. Whispers began to surface, strange behavior, inappropriate closeness, stories that didn't match the holy image of a priest. But in those years, no one wanted to believe it. The Catholic Church was untouchable. And Hecker knew that silence was his greatest protection. This was only the beginning. Chapter 2. The First Whispers. The 1960s were years of change in America. Civil rights marches, music revolutions, and cultural shifts. But inside the walls of the Catholic Church, the old ways remained untouched. Priests held unquestionable authority. Their words were sacred, their actions rarely challenged. Lawrence Hecker used that power well. Outwardly, he was charismatic and approachable. He played with children, laughed with parents, and became a figure families trusted. Many saw him as the friendly priest who connected easily with the youth. But beneath this holy image, something sinister was brewing. Young boys who spent time around Hecker noticed strange things. Some said he liked to wrestle with them after swimming. Others recalled moments when his hands lingered too long. At first, these incidents seemed confusing. Was it affection or something more? But soon it became clear. Hecker had begun crossing boundaries. Victims would later describe being touched, fondled, and manipulated by the priest they trusted. He used coded signs, sometimes even a feather, to signal his intentions. To the boys, it was terrifying. But to the outside world, there was no sign of danger. If a child ever tried to speak, adults dismissed it. Father Hecker would never do such a thing, they were told. Parents believed the priest over their own children. And so, the whispers were buried. The church itself had heard hints. There were subtle complaints, unusual stories, and rumors that traveled quietly through the archdiocese. But instead of confronting the truth, the leaders looked away. Protecting the image of the church was more important than protecting its children. And so, the first whispers of darkness vanished into silence. But Hecker wasn't done. He was only just beginning. Chapter 3: Patterns of Betrayal. As the years passed, Hecker became more confident. He realized he could act without consequences. No one questioned him. No one stopped him. That silence was the perfect shield. He built patterns, rituals of betrayal. He invited boys to the rectory, drove them to outings, even offered guidance in school gyms and weight rooms. These weren't random acts. They were carefully planned. Hecker's method was always the same. He gained trust first. He presented himself as a mentor, a father figure, a spiritual guide. Once the boys trusted him, he used that bond to cross the line. Survivors later recalled how confusing it was. How could a priest, a man of God, commit such acts? Some victims were groomed with attention and praise. Others were isolated, made to feel special, only to be manipulated. Hecker knew how to hide behind kindness. He made sure the outside world saw only the friendly priest, while the children carried the burden of his crimes in silence. It wasn't just about the acts themselves. It was about power. Hecker understood that these children felt helpless. If they told anyone, who would believe them? He was the priest, the authority, the man with God's blessing. They were just kids. And so the cycle continued. Year after year, parish after parish, Hecker left behind a trail of victims. The church received quiet complaints, but instead of removing him, they simply moved him. This betrayal wasn't just Hecker's, it became the church's betrayal too. Chapter 4: Silence in the Church. By the late 1980s, the whispers had grown louder. There were too many stories, too many hints of the truth. At last, the Archdiocese of New Orleans confronted Hecker in 1988. He admitted he had abused boys. He confessed. But instead of handing him to the police, instead of alerting the public, the church kept the secret locked away. They sent him to psychiatric facilities. Doctors confirmed he was a pedophile. They recommended treatment, but they didn't demand justice. After sessions of so-called therapy, Hecker returned quietly to parish life. In 1990, he was even given a new honor. He was made a Monsignor, a title of respect in the Catholic Church. Imagine that. A man who had confessed to abusing children was rewarded with higher status. The cover-up was complete. Parents were never told. Victims were ignored. Complaints were brushed aside. But church's priority wasn't justice, it was reputation. For them, keeping the scandal hidden mattered more than the lives already ruined. By the time Hecker retired in 2002, he did so with full benefits. He walked away with dignity in the eyes of the church, but behind him, he left scars that would never heal. The silence was deafening, and it lasted for decades. But silence doesn't last forever. Chapter 5: Victims in the Shadows. For the boys Hecker abused, childhood ended too soon. Some never spoke of it, burying the memories deep inside. Others tried to tell their parents or teachers, but were silenced. They were told they were making it up. That priests were holy men who couldn't do such things. That silence cut deeper than the abuse itself. Survivors later described the long shadows that followed them. Nightmares, depression, addiction, broken relationships. The betrayal wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. The very man who spoke of God's love had stolen their innocence. One survivor recalled being forced into silence when he tried to report what happened. The principal of his school told him he was lying. Another victim said he was sent to therapy, not Hecker, because the adults believed he was the one with the problem. Imagine the weight of that. A child punished for telling the truth. The trauma lingered for decades. Some victims left the church entirely, unable to set foot inside a place that had once been their sanctuary. Others carried guilt, wrongly believing they were at fault. Hecker's crimes didn't just wound children. They spread like poison through their entire lives. And yet, Hecker walked free. No charges, no trial, just silence. But the truth never stays buried forever. Chapter 6: The Secret Confession. By the late 1990s, the walls began to close in. Hecker's past could no longer be ignored. The archdiocese confronted him again, and this time, he admitted the truth. Hecker confessed to abusing multiple teenage boys. He admitted he had crossed boundaries again and again. The church had it in writing, his own words. There was no longer any doubt. But still, they chose silence. Instead of reporting him to the police, they sent him to a psychiatric hospital. Doctors labeled him a pedophile, confirming what survivors already knew. They warned he was dangerous, yet nothing changed. When he left the hospital, Hecker returned to his life as a priest. He preached sermons, gave communion, heard confessions, while his own sins remained hidden. The church knew, the doctors knew, he knew, but the public didn't. It was a dark agreement of silence. Hecker's confession was locked away, buried in church files. And with every day that passed, justice slipped further away. By 2002, when he retired, Hecker left quietly, his reputation still intact. For the victims, it was a cruel reminder. Their pain meant less than the church's image. Chapter 7: Retirement Without Shame. Retirement should have been the end of Hecker's public life. But it wasn't an exile, it was a reward. He left with full benefits, living comfortably as an old priest in New Orleans. Parishioners who didn't know the truth still treated him with respect. He was invited to gatherings, remembered for his service, spoken of as a man of faith. For the victims, it was like watching their abuser be celebrated. They suffered in silence while Hecker lived freely, unpunished, unshamed. The archdiocese never spoke of his crimes. They allowed him to fade into the background, just another retired priest. And for years, it seemed as if the past would stay buried forever. But in 2018, everything changed. That year, amid rising scandals of clergy abuse across America, the Archdiocese of New Orleans released a list. On it were the names of priests credibly accused of sexual abuse. For the first time, the name Lawrence Hecker appeared in public. The silence was broken. The media picked up the story, and the community reacted with shock. How could a priest who had been respected for so long also be a predator? Lawrence Hecker's time in prison was short. Just days after being sentenced to life, he was transferred to Elaine Hunt Correctional Center in Louisiana. Old, frail, and carrying the weight of his secrets, he lasted less than a month. On December 26, 2024, the news broke. Lawrence Hecker was dead. He died of natural causes at the age of 93. For many survivors, the news brought a complicated mix of emotions. Some felt relief. Justice at last had been served. This was the story of Lawrence Hecker. If you found this story important, don't forget to like this video, share it with others, and subscribe for more true crime documentaries. And let us know in the comments, do you think justice came too late? Because sometimes the truth waits decades to be heard.